Hey folks, it's Nate. It's time I got back to the drawing board and I wanted to talk a little bit about character designs. Now, when I was younger, probably about 10 or 11 years ago, I went and I saw a presentation by a professional cartoonist who talked a lot about how he drew and how he thought about um, basically every part of art. And one of the things he said that jumped out to me the most is that drawing is not you're especially when you're cartooning, you're not trying to duplicate reality on the page. Instead, you are using a visual language to communicate ideas to your audience. And so, a couple of lines becomes an eye, a couple of squiggles becomes lips, things like that, that communicate to the person the idea of a thing without looking exactly like the thing itself. And ever since I heard that, I tried to be very conscious when I drew of what shapes I was making and what I wanted the audience to take away from them. Um, and as I've done character design and art in general since then, I have tried to think very hard about visual language and visual metaphors that I'm going to use in my drawings. So I will have a consistent visual language across everything I do. So that as people get used to reading my stuff or just looking at my drawings, they begin to, whether consciously or subconsciously, pick up on the ideas I want them to have. Because ultimately, when you're telling a story, you are trying to communicate ideas. And so making sure those ideas are in your story from the ground up is very important. So when I do visual character design, I do a couple of things. And one of the first things I think ask myself is this character a man or a woman? And I know that's super politically incorrect right now, gender is fluid and all that stuff. First of all, it's true that people do express, being male or female to greater or lesser degrees. But especially comics are a very reductionist art form. You're trying to communicate as much information as possible in very small pieces of paper, and you need ideas clearly conveyed visually. And generally, you want to be about as subtle as a brick. So I just put together a couple of things to think about. And one of the biggest ones is it a man or is it a woman? You always hear these critics talking about, women are so over sexualized and, the men are so super muscular. And that's because it's a visual medium. When you exaggerate and idealize the male and female forms like that, you make it very clear at a glance what people are looking at. And that makes it much easier to tell stories quickly and efficiently, which you have to be in any storytelling medium, but especially in comics. So that's why the first question I ask is it a male or a female character? Now, when you look at male characters, and that's where we're going to start, there are a couple of different things you can look at. A lot of people will tend to draw male figures as very, very blocky. Look at Doug TenNapel or Donald DeLay for a really good example. I mean, even their skinny characters, they're just a mess of rectangles, almost held together by wire. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's a good style. So their men are very blocky. They have kind of squarish heads. They have squarish torsos of varying sizes. The hands are these big meaty things, and that's all fine. It's very clear, and it says what they want to say. But for me, in my visual language, I chose the triangle as the basic shape for men, and that's because generally when you look at a man at a distance, looking at their entire body, the thing that really stands out is their shoulders and their torso, and that makes kind of a triangular form, as you can see here. And if you zoom in, of course, on the front, well, then you're looking at the pecs and the six pack, and so you have again a very triangular shape. So that's like the heart of the male character, and of course at if you zoom in on certain parts of the male anatomy, like for example a bicep, that's basically a triangular shape, at least when it's flexed, and you usually show it flexed because that has the highest impact. And then like maybe if we zoom back and we add in the shoulder blade, well, that's just a larger triangle. So I tend to think of my males as triangular shapes. I want to present them as that very idealized kind of a T or triangular formation. Of course, they have their legs too, but if I zoom really far back, I'm probably going to show them with their arms out a little bit. So once again, we will have that triangular shape. And of course, if you're not idealized man, you might be a little overweight or a lot overweight. Well, the fact is, men tend to put on a lot of weight around their waist. They don't pack on as much on their arms or the legs. Maybe if they are very sedentary, they will. But you do see a lot of men that have extremely well-defined muscle on their arms and legs, and they just have a lot of fat around the middle. That's just the way male biology puts on weight. So then you have kind of like this inverse triangle, and it still says, I'm a man. Because women, when they're overweight, they tend to be more of an oval. We'll talk about that next week. But yeah, so still triangular. So that's the starting point. I like to think of my male characters in terms of triangles. So let's look at some characters that I designed and look at some other things that I put in there. So this is a very old character, Richard Jordan. He is a martial artist, and he's a bit wild. So one of the first things I did when I designed the character was his hair. And it's very messy. This is like I said, he's an old character. I designed it when I was very young, and I had very messy hair, so that's one of the reasons why he has messy hair. That's part of it. But it also implies a wild personality. These kind of flyaway hairs, they imply wildness, energy, a certain spontaneity. And so, like, unlike, say, a character with well-kept hair, he has wild hair, so that's a part of his design. Of course, his clothing emphasizes the T-shape by leaving his shoulders exposed, and then it tapers down into a belt. Belts are a very masculine piece of clothing, and I think one of the reasons is they do emphasize that idealized male shape with broad shoulders and a narrow waist. Creating that T shape or a triangular formation. Additionally, to emphasize, the fact that he was intended as a martial artist, he has these boxing or karate or Muay Thai hand wrappings. He does not actually practice any of those martial arts, so there's that. In fact, one of the other things I emphasize in all of his drawings is he does have this kind of open claw-like hand. That's not an effective martial arts technique. Instead, it implies that he is greedy. So when he holds his hands like that because he's attempting to grasp something. And that is one of his big personality flaws. So it is expressed, especially in those situations where it is most likely to come out, such as in the course of violence, when you are acting, when you are fighting, when you are hot-headed, the worst in you tends to come out. And so he fights with this open hand, grasping kind of thing. Not because, again, it's a good fighting technique. There are in-world lore reasons for why he does that, but mostly it's to reflect another personality trait. He is grasping. He is greedy. Like I said, Richard is an old character. I did not put as much thought into his design as I put in to some other things. In fact, his initial design came even before I had seen the presentation by the comics guy who I talked about earlier, whose name escapes me. He drew, what did he draw? I can't remember what he drew either. That's really terrible. I should have looked at this. But here, there you have it. Anyways, one other thing to note: he has very long hair, and I chose long hair rather than short, messy hair, like your typical shonen protagonist, because it emphasizes movement. At a core level, as a martial artist and as a character in what was intended as an action story, Richard moves a lot, and it's easier to show movement when there is something long and flowing in the character design that can snap around and follow with movements. Akira Toriyama, the author of Dragon Ball, he really cracked that when he gave his characters the ability to fly, because they always had this energy trail like trailing along behind him, and that really let him emphasize movement. For me, I put something in their design that is long and flowing, and that tells you that this is a character of a action, man or woman, because it can go either way. But generally, um, either way, I want something long and flowing. Which brings me to the next character design. This is Alexander Maxwell, and he is sometimes a man of action. So his character design, part of it is that he has this long cloak that he wears. He also has a mask, not shown here. But he wears this cloak when he is going out working, to show that he is transformed from what he is at one time to what he is at another time. Because Maxwell is a man of two faces, hence the mask. He is a very static character. He specializes in gathering intelligence. He leads a spy network. So he generally, most of the time, is not a hands-on person. So he will generally dress very conservatively. But when the time for action comes, he can don the cloak, and that indicates that he is transforming from a sedentary man who thinks a great deal and puts pieces together to a man of action. So again, he wears a vest, which kind of puts an emphasis on the shoulders by leaving them exposed and creating some visual interest there. It also has a V-neck collar and, of course, a cravat. Or a kerchief, or however you want to call that, whatever the proper term is. And this collar emphasizes, the triangular shape by echoing it up here. So it's actually two triangles. There's one here, and there's a larger one of his shoulders down to his waist. So again, there's a triangle worked into his character design. He didn't originally have a vest. This was something I added later on after I began thinking about, the visual language I wanted my characters to have. So that's an added thing, another uniquely male component. I want to talk about the face. I didn't actually talk about this. Both of these characters are very. They have a very strong will, or they are very resolved, perhaps, or very stubborn. And so they have very strong, blocky jawlines. This is a characteristic, stubbornness or a resolute nature is something I like to convey with those blocky shapes, the very resolute shapes. Which is one of the reasons why I chose not to have it be the shape that defined a lot of my male characters, and that also lets me include more rectangular blocky shapes for women who are supposed to be very stubborn or very resolved, possessing a strong will. They might have a square jaw or a square nose. Or perhaps they will have something blocky worked into their clothing. Again, we'll talk about that more next week. Another thing to note is that Alex wears these rather unique boots and gloves. Again, these are actually part of his working gear as opposed to his normal or sedentary dress, and they represent a layer of protection. When he is getting ready to fight, he does equip himself to be defended. And like he doesn't carry a weapon. That's not a part of his character design. He is again, leader of an intelligence organization. He prefers subtlety, but he can fight when needed. And again, given his position as the leader of a covert network, and also a bit of a morally ambiguous figure, instead of just punching people, he has these hooks, and hooks are an image that I want to be associated with cruelty. Again, uh, this is a flaw in the character that is apparent in the way he is visually designed. He has claws on both his shoes and his glove. Now, in world, these are there to help him with climbing and scrabbling over things in case he's infiltrating a building. But he will, in a pinch, use them to fight. And of course, then they will not just cut, but they will rip, they will tear, they will pierce and catch in a very cruel fashion. And that is a metaphor for one of Alex's great failings. When he is up against the wall, he will do whatever he thinks is necessary, regardless of how it hurts other people, including people he may actually like. And in this way, he is a pretty, let's be honest, he's a pretty stereotypical rogue or spy master type character in that respect. One final thing is he does have a very prominent nose. Alex is a very arrogant man, and the prominent nose is often your nose in the air is often conflated with pride or arrogance. So yeah, that's I gave him a prominent nose. It's my intention that when people have a very proud disposition, to generally include that nose again as a visual cue. Final person. Okay, Al Cook from Hexwood. If you've seen any of my other videos, you've probably seen pictures of him. So Al is he's a couple of things. The first thing is he is a very stubborn person, and this is actually not shown in his jawline like it was with Alex or with Richard. It's shown in this rectangle right here. So he wears a blacksmith's apron. This is a leather apron. He actually works in a mine, but it's the same. They wear these kind of aprons for much the same thing. It protects the clothes to a certain extent, and it makes sure when you're handling fuses and things like that, you don't burn yourself. So there's that. And then, of course, he is extremely broad-shouldered, and he has the bulging muscles. So that's two more triangles in his general character design. Al is always going to look like he's flexing when he's shown. This represents, of course, physical power, because he is a physical specimen. He is far and away physically the strongest character in Hexwood. He is actually has a very, very minor supernatural blessing that makes him stronger than any regular human could hope to be. Al is also ex-military, so he has this hat here with a medallion on it. Hexwood is kind of a pseudo 1800s world. This is kind of patterned off some of the infantry caps you'll see in Civil War photos. And other than that, he dresses simply because he is a mine foreman. He doesn't really need very fancy clothing, but he does have his honking greatsword right there. Of course, he has some facial hair. This is just there to create visual interest around his face. He has a prominent lower lip. This implies a certain strength of character. And this is another way to show resolve. It's kind of a blocky shape, that heavy lower lip. Then he is aging, so he has a bald head, some white hair. He's a very simple character design. I really like it because it is simple and easy to draw. And Alo's a simple character. An overcomplicated character design would say too much about him. Like Al is a person who likes simplicity for his own sake. He doesn't like to think hard. That doesn't make him stupid. He's actually quite smart. But he likes simple things, and he likes to really put his back into his work. He's strong. He knows he's strong. He takes pleasure in being strong, and he likes exerting himself physically. Um, so yeah, that's the character in a nutshell. And I like to think that the design makes it very clear that he is a much more simple character than his compatriots. Um, I don't have SketchUps of let me see if I can find that shot where they are all. Is that in this book? I don't know. Okay, so here's a shot of his compatriots, and you can see um, both Mark Pendleton and Han Yu Deng have more complex character designs. They wear more articles of clothing total. They have more lines in them, and all of this, the waistband, um, the belt, the vest. Of course, they wear badges. All of these things are things that require maintenance and upkeep that a character like Al would not care for. This is also why Al Cook is not a deputy. You'll note he doesn't wear a badge like these two do. He doesn't want the hassle of being a sheriff or a sheriff's deputy full time. So, yeah, you take all these things together, and these are the the absence of things. It can say something about your character as well. So yeah, character design. There's more to it than just what looks cool. Of course, you want to look cool. That's very important. But thinking about the themes and building a language for your themes is a big part of it as well. And of course, there are more elements just beyond triangles mean a man, or strong rectangular shapes show stubbornness or resilience, that we'll talk about more as time goes on. This is just sort of an overview and an introduction to thinking about how you can start to build those ideas and metaphors into everything you draw. Anyway, I hope that's been interesting, hearing a little bit more about the process and how I think about art. And that's all I got for now. So there's a like and a subscribe button down below. Use them as you see fit, and I'll talk to you later.